A lot of people were talking about the Trump's feud with the Pope, what's happening politically. I did mention that I had heard from people in the Iranian diaspora, you could probably comment on this, that they're very disappointed, obviously, that he didn't speak out against the slaughter that went on at the early part of the year. And for him to choose to get involved now politically and attack Trump is pretty ludicrous. But they basically all kept saying the same thing to me. This was a quote. They said, he's not John Paul II. That came up at least three times. And I'm wondering, I just was listening to that. I'm wondering what you think about the general role of the Pope in having a role in post regime Iran. If you think he can have the influence that John Paul II did have when sort of the fight against communism in a similar way. If you think there's anything worth discussing there, I'm just curious to get your thoughts.
The influence of the Pope inside Iran after Iran is liberated? Is that
No,
what you're
in
saying?
really in being an international bulwark against,
Oh,
adverse enemies. The way that John Paul II helped with the Cold War against communism, with the Solidarity movement in Poland, stopping communism spread in Central and South America. He was basically a major part of the reason why we won the Cold War. And I'm wondering if you think that this current Pope, if there's any role for him to play in a post regime
I think
Iran. And
I might be incorrect, but I think that the entire, like, the position of the Pope in general, like that seat has become less influential as a whole, and Pope after Pope is becoming less and less influential compared to as we go forward, right? That's my impression of the Vatican. I think the Vatican is becoming less and less influential in general. And if the popes are take anti-conservative positions, they speed that up, right?
mm,
Because if anything could unite Catholics as conservative positions, right? But if a pope take anti-conservative positions, then it increases the division among Catholics, and it speeds up the reduction in the relevancy of Vatican when it comes to world affairs. That's my impression. I don't, because I don't know if that's correct though. I'm open to other people's opinions, but what do you think about what I'm saying?
I agree. I think, very generally speaking, that there's an erosion effect when religious spiritual leaders dip into politics. It has effects on their religious legitimacy. I think as it relates, though, to Christians in Iran, because obviously that's a very fast growing religion, there might be something there as far as.
Not really. Yep. In Iran, okay. So when we say Christianity is growing really fast in Iran, is because we're starting with a very small number, right?
Right.
So if you are, like, if there's 1,000 people in a room, right, and there's one Christian, adding one more Christian is like a 100% increase, right? So that
Mm.
is, oh my God, we had 100% increase in the Christian population in this room. So it looks pretty impressive, but it's only because we're starting with a very low number.
Yeah.
But yeah, and even the Christians in Iran, I assume most of them are not Catholic. I assume most of them. So I don't know. Even if there are Christians in Iran, I don't think the Pope will have that much of an influence. But I may be wrong about that. But I don't think the Pope taking political position would reduce their political influence. If the Pope takes politically divisive positions among Catholics, like, for example, if the Pope becomes politically influential against communism, that is not going to reduce their, historically, that doesn't reduce the political relevancy of the Pope. That increases the political relevancy of the Pope, because that's something that Catholics would like, hell yeah, let's go. This is a unifying thing, right? It's only if they come
Mm.
out and take positions where, like, I don't know, regarding gays, like more progressive positions on gays, then now we're going to divide the Catholics. If we talk about global warming, if we talk about Palestine, if we talk about Israel, and if we talk about the war against the Islamic Republic. So the Catholics are not going to agree with each other on those points. So taking positions that different Catholics have different views about, that is going to reduce their unity, and that's going to reduce their political relevancy. And I think the more progressive popes have managed to speed up the reduction in the relevancy of the Vatican. What do you think?
Yeah, I do agree with that. But I would like to say that any religious leader claiming any kind of moral authority who doesn't speak out against tens of thousands of people being slaughtered over the course of 3 days can't claim that position. And it's just not possible.
Yes, that is the most telling. This is so embarrassing for this current pope. It's such an obvious attack against the current pope, and there's no defense for it. You came out and you condemned the war against the Islamic Republic. And even if we say, okay, fair, some people believe that this was, it's easy to see why from a Christian perspective, why some people will be like, "Oh, no to all wars," okay, including this one. I think that's a ridiculous position. We have just war. If you study this, I think, right, Saint Augustine,
Yeah.
you could see just war theory, right? Am I correct about my?
Yeah. The person I
Am
was talking to
yeah,
quoted St. Augustine. Yeah.
yeah. Saint Augustine has the just war theory. So coming out and suggesting that, I don't know, like war is bad in general, like you're one of the founding fathers of your church have came up with the just war theory. So what are you talking about? But even if you were like, no, it's okay, like Christians in general have no war like attitude, so it's fine, let them say. Yeah, but then why were you silent when the Islamic Republic was committed the greatest act of massacre against the civilian population in modern history? Like, why were you like, this seems to be more of an anti-Trump bias rather than, given this guy's history being anti-Trump, this seems to be more of an anti-Trump bias rather than a taking a moral stance against violence and war. I've seen so many Catholics being like, "Yeah, what the fuck." So I haven't seen anybody even attempting to justify the Pope taking a position against President Trump attacking the Islamic Republic by being completely silent about the Islamic Republic massacring Iranians in astronomically high numbers.
So somebody I was talking to did try to justify that. I'm claiming devil's advocate here, but he
Oh,
basically, when he was quoting St. Augustine, said the church teaching says that you're unable to use a sword against another nation unless that nation lifts a sword against you first. And I told him, if the last
oh yeah.
47 years isn't a sword raised against our country, I don't know what your standard could possibly be, because that sounds insane.
Literally,
Yeah.
no other country is responsible for killing more Americans than the Islamic Republic. No other state, I should say. Literally,
Yeah.
there's not a single other state. And 47 years of chanting death to America and attacking the embassy, and the very year that the Islamic Republic was founded, them attacking they basically, that was the declaration of war against against United States from day one of the Islamic Republic. By the way, when I say Saint Aquinas, I was talking about Thomas Aquinas. Okay, I was mixing Thomas Aquinas with
Oh.
Saint Augustine. Yeah, but that's why I was saying Aquinas. But yeah, Saint Augustine. Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, they had raised their sword many times.
I just want to say that I agree with Armin that the Vatican and religious authorities in general are losing power, which is the Vatican in particular because historically had the most. I will say, as a Mormon, one of the things that we're seeing in our community that we haven't historically is Catholics. Not everybody, not all, but like they've been more aggressive towards us and been more critical of us taking any kind of political stance, which shows to me that there is some kind of power vacuum going on politically. So, just a thought. The end.